Welcome to Honeybee. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Real stories of love, lies, and betrayal, where every truth stings. Let's begin. My name is Dalton, and if someone had told me a decade ago that I'd one day be standing in my own kitchen, scalded by coffee my stepdaughter hurled at me while her mother silently stood by and watched, I would have laughed in their face. But it happened. That was the moment I broke. I knew right then that if I didn't draw a line, I'd be telling the world and myself that I was fine being treated this way. And I wasn't. Not anymore. I was in my early 30s when I became a widower. I lost my wife, my best friend, the girl I'd known since childhood. We grew up side by side, and somewhere along the way we became inseparable. Loving her felt as natural as breathing. She knew every corner of my soul, and I knew her heart better than I knew my own. When we finally got married, it felt like my whole life had finally fallen into place. Exactly the way it was meant to. But life isn't always fair. Not long after we started settling into married life, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. By the time we found out, we were already running out of time. There was nothing left to do but fight. And fight we did with everything we had. For years we chased every option we could find. Chemotherapy, radiation, clinical trials. Anything that gave us even the smallest glimpse of hope. I watched her body weaken, but her spirit never broke. She smiled through the pain. She prayed even when she was scared. And I stayed by her side every single step, trying to be strong even as I was breaking apart inside. In the end, cancer won. She passed away, and a part of me went with her. After the funeral, I didn't know what to do with myself. I buried myself in work, thinking if I stayed busy enough, I wouldn't notice the crushing silence in the house. But no matter how late I worked, the bed still felt too big. The house was too quiet. The food had no taste. 2 years passed like that. Empty years. I wasn't living, just existing. Friends kept suggesting I try dating again, but the very thought made me feel sick. The dating world looked chaotic, shallow, and fast, like some game with no rules and no soul. I wasn't built for casual hookups or empty small talk. I had known real love, and nothing else could compare. So I kept to myself. I focused on my work. I made peace with the idea that maybe love wasn't something I would find again. At least, that's what I thought, until Melanie came along. A family friend kept insisting I meet a single mom she knew. Said her name was Melanie, that she was kind, grounded, and the type of woman who could make a house feel like home. I brushed it off again and again, but the friend wouldn't let it go. Finally, just to stop the constant pestering, I agreed to go on one date. That first night with Melanie surprised me, not just because she looked beautiful, but because she was warm. She asked me about my work. She laughed at my dry jokes. She listened without trying to fix me. We talked for hours. Somewhere in that conversation, she opened up about her daughter, told me the girl's father had passed away when she was just a baby. It hit me hard. Pain recognizes pain. I agreed to see her again. This time, she invited me to her home for dinner. I was nervous walking in, but that's the night I met her daughter, a shy, giggly 5-year-old who called me uncle. That night, over dinner, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. When the little girl went to bed and the house grew quiet, Melanie and I slipped into a different kind of conversation, one that eventually led us to the bedroom. For the first time in years, I felt alive. That night changed me. For the first time, I didn't feel like loving someone new meant betraying my late wife. I started to imagine a future with Melanie, not just as a partner, but as someone I could build a second chapter of life with. And her daughter? I didn't see her as a burden. I saw her as a chance to love someone who never got to know her real father. Things moved quickly after that. Dating Melanie made me feel alive again. I fell in love with her and with her daughter. I treated that little girl like she was my own. I gave her the same devotion and protection I'd once given my late wife and the family we were trying to build together. And for a while, it felt like both Melanie and her daughter truly welcomed me. About a year into our relationship, I looked around my house one day and realized it made no sense to them to keep living in a cramped apartment. I asked them to move in. They did, and life felt right. One night, Shortly after they had settled in, Melanie casually mentioned that it had always been her dream to be married someday. It was just an offhand comment, but I tucked it away in my heart. On our second anniversary, I knelt down in our living room and asked her to marry me. She cried and said yes. We got legally married a few months later. For a while, everything seemed perfect. We had our share of small arguments like any couple, but nothing serious. I truly believed I was finally getting my second chance at happiness. But peace is fragile, and love, when left unprotected, can be taken for granted. Things stayed good until my stepdaughter found out I wasn't her biological father. I had been there since she was 5. I never treated her like anything other than my own. But once she learned the truth, something in her changed. Her attitude turned cold, hostile. At first, I brushed it off. Teenagers act out sometimes, right? I gave her space, thinking it would pass. I still loved her deeply. I kept showing up for her, paid her school fees, giving her allowances, making sure she had everything she needed. But the more I tried, the more she pushed me away. She'd talk back, ignore the rules, storm out of the house without saying where she was going, then return late at night as if nothing happened. One day, when I gently reached out to get her attention, she slapped my hand away like I was a stranger. Each time she crossed a line, I'd look to Melanie, waiting, hoping she'd step in as her mother. But she never did. Not once. Her silence cut deeper than her daughter's words. Eventually, I sat Melanie down and asked her why she never spoke up when her daughter disrespected me. She immediately got defensive, almost irritated, and snapped, "What do you want me to do?" I just stared at her. I wanted to explain how much that silence hurt, but something in me knew it wouldn't matter. From that point on, everything shifted for me, not just with my stepdaughter, but with the woman I thought was my partner. Things only got worse. My stepdaughter came and went whenever she pleased. Some nights, she didn't come home at all. One evening, I spotted her down the street with a much older boy. Too close, whispering, standing in a way that told me everything I needed to know. I waited for her to come home and sat her down calmly. I told her that if she wanted to keep sneaking out, hiding things, and disrespecting the house, then I would stop trying to act like her father. Before I could finish, Melanie jumped in, loud, defensive, telling me not to talk to her like that, accusing me of damaging her self-esteem. I was stunned. I wasn't trying to hurt her daughter. I was trying to guide her. But instead of backing me, Melanie made me the villain. That's when I realized this wasn't about parenting. It was about control. I wasn't a partner anymore. I was just a man who paid the bills, a voice that no longer mattered. I'm not a man who yells or starts drama. So I didn't fight her that night. I just shut down inside. One Saturday morning, I came downstairs to make coffee, like I always did. My stepdaughter was already there. She greeted me, then said she'd been waiting. She needed money for a shopping trip with friends. In the past, I would have handed her my card without thinking. But things had changed. I was done being treated like a wallet. I looked her in the eye and calmly said, "I don't have money to give you." She exploded, accused me of lying, said I hated her. Her voice rose, but I stayed calm. When I reached out to touch her arm and get her to stop for a second, she shoved my hand away, and then threw her hot coffee straight at me. It hit my chest and soaked through my shirt. I staggered back, more stunned than anything. And then she said it. "Go to hell with your money." She stormed out. I turned to my right, and there was Melanie. She had seen the entire thing, and she said nothing, not a word. I pulled out my phone, turned the camera on myself, and recorded everything. "This," I said, "is what your daughter just did because I told her I wasn't giving her my credit card." Then I turned the camera toward Melanie, who stood there with her arms crossed, like she was watching a boring TV show. I looked her dead in the eye and said clearly, "I don't want to see your daughter in this house again. Ever." That's when Melanie finally reacted, but not the way I expected. She exploded, shouting that I had no right, that her daughter wasn't going anywhere. That told me everything I needed to know. She didn't care that her daughter had crossed the line into abuse. She only cared that I dared to set a boundary. I didn't argue. I just stood there quietly, watching the woman I once loved choose her silence when I was humiliated, and choose rage only when her control was threatened. The rest of that day, I barely moved. My body was still, but my mind kept replaying everything, not just the coffee incident, but all the little moments that led to it. That coffee wasn't the beginning. It was the final proof that I had lost control of my own home. And I realized something. I didn't sign up to be disrespected in my own house. If keeping a marriage means losing your dignity, then it isn't a marriage, it's a prison. I wasn't going to live like that. By Monday morning, I'd made up my mind. I called a lawyer and explained everything calmly. He listened, then told me the words I've been waiting to hear. You have a case, and you have leverage. See? The house wasn't even in my name. It was under my mother's. She bought it and gifted it to me during my first marriage. I paid all the bills. Melanie hadn't worked in years. Her daughter was fully dependent on me. I wasn't just walking away. I was standing my ground. I filed for divorce that same day and formally gave them 7 days to leave the house. It wasn't a threat. It was a legal move. Melanie laughed and said I wouldn't dare. But I did. They refused to leave, and just like that, we were headed to court. Standing there in that courtroom, I didn't feel angry. I felt sad. 10 years of love, care, and provision had been reduced to legal paperwork, court dates, and lawyers arguing over property and rights. I kept thinking, how do we end up here? Looking back now, there are lessons I wish I had known before marrying someone with a child. If the child respect is optional, your peace will never be secure. If the parent won't back you up when discipline is needed, you'll always be the villain. You're not just marrying a person. You're stepping into a system that might never accept you, no matter how much you give. These aren't bitter words. They're honest ones. I share them because someone watching this might still have time to ask the hard questions before they give away 10 years to the wrong people. So now I'll ask you, what would you have done in my place? You gave everything. You loved, protected, provided. And in the end, you're left with scars and silence. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Maybe your words will help someone else make the right decision before it's too late. Thank you for watching.